Welcome to Substance-Free 02043, brought to you by Hingham Cares. I'm Kristen Arute. I am President and Program Director of Hingham Cares. Our mission is to prevent and reduce substance use among youth within our community. Our guest today is Hannah Walsh. She is a Hingham High School graduate, a person in recovery, and she also works in the field of recovery. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi, happy to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. Could you tell us what it was like for you going through the Hingham schools?
Yeah, so I transitioned into Hingham Public Schools after being homeschooled. So I was homeschooled up until 6th grade. And then in the 6th grade, I went to Hingham Middle School, which is the old middle school now. It's since been knocked down and rebuilt. But yeah, in general, my experience at Hingham Schools was positive. I look back and think fondly of my time there. I definitely had like some personal stuff come up in those years, but school was never a problem for me, and I had a good time there. I had a lot of friends. I did sports. I always felt like I was challenged in school. My freshman year, I did rowing and played tennis, and then
Crew, you mean?
Yeah, crew.
Okay.
So I should say crew. I did crew. I guess I rowed crew.
Mm-hmm.
And after freshman year, that kind of became like my life. Like I decided I wanted to do crew, and I did it all 3 seasons, and that kind of became like my whole social life, my whole identity. Like the crew cult is what they say, I think, in Hingham.
Prior to entering high school, something happened in your family that kind of changed the trajectory of your family, decisions that you made moving forward. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so like I said, I transitioned into public schools in 6th grade shortly after in October 9th of 2010, one of my sisters committed suicide. So yeah, that definitely threw a wrench in the transition that my family was already going through, going from homeschooling to public school, and losing a sibling was obviously a life-changing event in my life and in my family's life.
Right. And establishes a certain amount of grief that you never fully recover from, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was 12 years old at the time. I had no idea really how to handle the emotions of the situation. I think like while I was trying to fit in, I was trying to adjust to school and figure out like how to be a kid in an environment with other kids. I also had an additional situation at my house, and I had just lost a sister. Like I didn't know how to carry myself already, but I certainly didn't know how to carry myself after that.
Right.
Like I remember walking into lunch in 6th grade, one of the early days in 6th grade, and I didn't know like where to sit. I didn't know, like, am I supposed to choose what lunch table I sit at? Like I didn't know anyone. Like my neighbor wasn't in my lunch, so I couldn't sit with her. And I didn't understand that like people sat with their friends, or like, do I just ask someone if I can sit with them at their table? And so it was really hard for me in going into 6th grade. And then when my sister passed away, I felt kind of like even more of a giant sign on my head. I was like, not only is this girl homeschooled and like odd, she also has a sister that died in a very dark way. And at that point, like, luckily my older sister was also in school at the time with me, and so I think I really clung on to her for emotional support. I remember like seeing her in the hallways, and that was like the only time of the day that I felt like some sense of relief and some sense of safety. Because again, I didn't know how to talk about the fact that my sister had just passed away in my family, completely unexpectedly and in a very like tragic way. I did end up making some really good friends during that time who stuck with me for, some of them like are still my best friends today. But it definitely was difficult for me and for my family too. I think my parents didn't know really like when to send us back to school or how to get us support. Like, did they want the school counselors pulling us out of class? Did they want us to be in therapy? Did they want us to feel different than more different than we already felt?
Right.
Definitely changed my family in some ways for the better, in some ways for the worse. I think my family grew closer as a result of that happening. But losing a child and losing a sibling is something that I don't think any family is prepared for or knows how to handle when it does happen. And it's also definitely when I started to kind of have a lot of shame about myself because I didn't know how to handle. Like I didn't understand my emotions, and I remember being in 6th grade and like I was, like I said, trying to be normal. So I wasn't crying a lot about the situation, and I wasn't really expressing like what was going on with me.
So you were suppressing feelings?
Yeah, absolutely.
And trying to put on a different face.
Yes. Yeah. So that's when the mask definitely started for me, when I started to pretend I was someone that I wasn't, and act like I was okay and you know, everything was good, and when that wasn't the case.
And that was your coping mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
at the time. And then later on it turned into other things, but yes,
right.
Just like pretending I was good was definitely my coping mechanism.
So when did that all start to no longer work for you? When did you begin to crumble a little bit?
I mean, it took probably another like 8 years before I really crumbled, but I know that around the time that my sister passed away was also the first time that I drank. So someone close to me, like one of my close family friends, introduced me to alcohol for the first time. So I grew up in a house that my parents never drank. Mm-hmm. So I didn't grow up around any substances at all. Mm-hmm. I come from a family that has alcoholism in the generations above me, and some of my parents' siblings have also struggled, but I wasn't around alcohol growing up. And so after my sister passed away, I had a friend who was like, let's just drink the Bud Lights in the cooler that are on the porch. And I didn't connect at the time that would maybe become a coping mechanism for me, because the first time I drank, I certainly didn't get drunk the first time I drank. I think a lot of alcoholics' experience is that may have been the first time they drank, they get drunk. That wasn't my experience, but it was uncomfortable for me to have one drink. I knew from the very start that like if I was going to drink again after that, I needed multiple. Like I wasn't going to bother with one Bud Light ever again.
And how old were you at this point?
12.
So you were still in 6th grade?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This was like probably a few months after my sister passed away.
And do you think that that's because of the way that you're wired, or do you think that was, you recognize that there was an opportunity to self-medicate?
I mean, I think it's probably a mix of a lot. I think it was a perfect storm, but I also do believe that I just have, for me, like I just think I'm an alcoholic, and I was going to be an alcoholic regardless of the circumstances that happened in my life, whether my sister passed away or not, or whether someone gave me that Bud Light that day or not. Like, I personally believe that at some point in my life, alcohol was going to become a problem for me. Like, it was going to become a coping mechanism just because of the way you responded to it. Yeah, the way I responded to it, the way it made me feel.
So you felt that right out of the starting gate. Do you remember the next time you drank, what your response was to alcohol, and then like subsequent encounters with alcohol?
I don't remember the exact next time I drank. I do know that I didn't start drinking like socially until high school. So I had that experience in 6th grade, and then I think I had a few other times, but they're not memorable to me. And then in freshman year was when I started to drink like socially on the weekends with my friends. And at that point, I didn't really stand out as a problem drinker at that time, nor did it really occur to me that I had a problem with drinking. I mean,
what do you mean you didn't stand out? You didn't think you had a problem, or you didn't stand out among your friends as having a problem?
I don't think I stood out among my friends, and I've since talked to them. Like, I don't think I wasn't Hannah has a problem with alcohol from the start.
They didn't notice anything out of the norm?
No.
Your friends didn't recognize you? Your friends just thought that you were drinking socially like they were?
Yeah. I was never the kid that was the most drunk. I was never the girl that, you know, was like causing significantly more problems than anyone else at that point in my life. But over the next 4 years, it started to get, you know, alcohol became like more and more of the main event in my life.
By your own choosing, or because that's the situation that you found yourself in?
I don't know that it was my own choosing. It just, because of the way that I reacted to alcohol and what alcohol did for me, it just slowly started to become the most important thing in my life. So,
gotcha.
Like on the weekends, I had like sporting events on the weekends, and then we would go out after or hang out after, and it was always about alcohol. Like I was more excited for the night after the sporting event than I was for the actual event. And that happened pretty early on. Like once I started drinking socially, it just became like that's all I thought about during school and during sports. And it was always, when is the next time I can drink with my friends?
And this is throughout high school.
Yeah.
And it gets progressively more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. So in high school, I graduated without thinking I had a problem with alcohol. I mean, I still had never been to the hospital. I'd never blacked out. Like I didn't lose any friendships at this point. I knew I loved alcohol a lot, and I liked to party, and I liked to hang out with my friends, but I didn't understand that alcohol was like slowly becoming more and more and more important.
Did you think that everybody else felt that same way? The people that you were socializing with all felt the same way about alcohol? It didn't really stick out to you that maybe you were feeling differently or treating it differently? Yeah.
I certainly felt differently in just who I was. I've always felt like I was different than other kids. Like I've always felt I remember being in like 8th grade telling my parents that I felt like I thought deeper than other kids and I experienced feelings deeper in like an abnormal way. And I remember saying that to my parents, and I always kind of felt like that. I experienced life in a more intense way than other kids. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. But that's how I felt different from other kids or from other people my age, was like I just felt like I cared a lot more what people thought. Like I had a sister that passed away, so I felt like that was something that kind of separated me. And, you know, I grew up in Hingham, and my family was not like this picture perfect family. Like, I guess on paper, like we were similar to other families, but there was stuff going on at home that was just not, you know, other families felt like they had it a lot more together than mine did.
It seemed that way to you.
It seemed that way to me, yeah.
Right. Did alcohol use ever impact sports or academics for you when you were in high school?
So alcohol didn't become an issue to the point that it was affecting sports or school for me. While I was in high school, it definitely started to do those things later on. I do remember having a summer job in one of the summers in high school, and me and my friends had gone out to the Xfinity Center. I think we were seeing Tim McGraw, and I overdid it with alcohol, and I drank too much, and I woke up the next morning and I missed work. And that was the first time that I think my parents were like, that's not normal drinking. Like, you're missing work because you drank too much. And that's also when I kind of started to have this feeling that I needed to kind of like hide how much I was drinking, like hide, you know, like I always avoided seeing my parents when I got home. Like I just would go straight down to bed. And that was the first time that I was really ashamed of how much I drank. And, you know, my dad was aware because I was throwing up. Like that was the first time that it was like on display for someone else to see how alcohol affected me in a very negative way.
So basically you functioned well given the circumstances in high school. So anybody looking at you would have thought that you were dealing with life just fine. They wouldn't necessarily know that internal dialogue that you were dealing with or the questions that you had about your own use. When you went off to college, though, did things start to ramp up a little bit?
Yeah, so my freshman year of college, I had like a difficult time with college because I was in a place where I wanted to go to school for rowing and it just wasn't happening. And of course, growing up in Hingham, there's a lot of pressure to go to a good school and a 4-year school. And I applied to a bunch of schools, and my parents made me apply to some schools that I did not want to go to. And those were my safety schools. And I was kind of forced into applying to them. Not forced, just strongly encouraged. And I ended up having to go to one of them. So I went to Suffolk University in Madrid. So I went off to Madrid my freshman year of college, which obviously the drinking age there is 18. And so I could buy alcohol whenever I wanted to. And that's the first time that I kind of realized that the social norms surrounding alcohol were not laws. You know, it was not illegal to drink at 10 a.m. And I realized that when I was in Spain, because
Oh, interesting.
yeah, because I mean, people do drink during the day there, and
So it was basically unrestricted use.
yeah, and I quickly realized, like, yeah, I don't have to not drink at any. There's no situation, there's no time of day where I can't get buzzed or I can't get drunk. You know, so. Because the drinking age was 18 and I lived above a supermarket, like I started to just go down and buy sangria to do my homework. And it didn't occur to me yet that that would be the start of, you know, a new path for me. But I did know that, you know, I wasn't aware that it was the start of a whole new journey in life. But I guess, like, yeah, that's the first time that I started drinking alone, and it started becoming more regular, and I started doing it. At that point, I still could go, like, you know, I did it last Friday, I'm going to do it next Tuesday, and I could go like long periods of time without it, but it was always like an option for me.
And because you were so far away, you didn't have to hide it from anyone.
Yeah, I didn't have to hide it. I was in a host family. I do remember moments where, like, my host mother would come into the room and I would hide the alcohol that I had. So I wasn't hiding it from my mom, but I was hiding it from the host mom. Again, I wasn't thinking at the time that I wasn't identifying. I didn't think I was an alcoholic at that point. I was just kind of like, well, I can drink whenever I want now, so I might as well.
You were doing what you felt was culturally acceptable.
Yeah, yeah. And I knew it wasn't culturally acceptable at home, but it was there. And, you know, I would just add sangria to the grocery cart. It wasn't like a whole big thing that I was going down to get the alcohol. I just could, so I started to.
So when did you realize that your relationship with alcohol was unhealthy?
So after my freshman year in Spain, I transferred to UMass Amherst. So in sophomore year of college is probably when I started to think, like, oh, this may be a little bit of a bigger issue. This may be an actual problem for me.
What were the warning signs for you? What were you doing that was making you feel like it was a bigger issue for you?
I was using opportunities where none of my friends were around. So I had stayed on campus for a long weekend and nobody was around. And I took that as an opportunity to drink, and like to drink in secret, basically, and drink however I wanted to. And
so you were drinking, you were finding ways to drink secretly. It all of a sudden became what was once a social component to your life is now like a dark secret almost. It's something that brings you shame. And was that an indication to you that you were doing something that was problematic?
Yeah, I think it started to be coupled with more blackouts and more chaos. And I started to also, when I was drinking socially, cause problems. I think my first night at UMass, like I blacked out and I threw up in an Uber and it just cost $200. And like I started doing things like that. I started becoming the most drunk person in the room.
Okay.
And not remembering. I started blacking out frequently. It was normal for me to not remember what I did the night before, not remember how I got to where I woke up.
Were your friends concerned about that?
I think at UMass there's a little bit of a culture of that, at least in the circle that I was in.
Partying.
There's a lot of partying there. Yeah, there's a lot of partying, so it was easy for me to blend in for a while. But I definitely had relationships that were close to me that were aware that my drinking was a problem and it wasn't normal, and I was drinking more than everybody else, and I was being more secretive about it. And, you know, I would go to a party where people were drinking and I had been drinking for 5 hours before that and didn't tell anyone that.
Right.
So it's kind of like, how did this girl get like that if she's been drinking just like how we have? But the truth was that I was actually drinking significantly more than everybody else around me.
Right.
And I just did it in a way that nobody knew. I think it became obvious to people when I would just be heavily intoxicated early on in the night and do things that just didn't make sense. And then I would wake up and be very ashamed of the things I did. A lot of what I started doing was in complete contrast to who I wanted to be or who I thought I was. You know, like I consider myself someone that is kind and, you know, not rude to others. And then I would wake up and find out that I behaved in a way that I had no intention of behaving. And I would have no recollection of it. And I would always tell myself, like, okay, I'm not going to do that this night. And at the time I was still in college, so it was like I was going to keep going out. But every night that I went out, it was like, I'm not going to cause problems. I'm not going to embarrass myself. I'm not going to be ashamed. And I started to just like over and over and
just a
over
vicious
again.
Cycle.
Yeah, it was like the same thing every night, pretty much.
When you started drinking in 6th grade, you talked about how you didn't get drunk at first, but you knew that you had sort of a craving for alcohol. And then things progressed and you were drinking socially in high school, but you still kind of recognized that your relationship with alcohol was different from other people, or you perceived it as different. And then the older you got, it just, you know, it just increased. Do you think in retrospect that alcohol was being used to suppress feelings, to help you maintain that mask that you would put on that you described in 6th grade? Was it a form of self-medication?
Yeah, I think absolutely alcohol was a form of self-medication. I mean, it was the one thing. Once I discovered alcohol, it seemed like it was the answer to all my problems. I talked a little bit about, you know, feeling like I thought deeper than other kids. And I always described myself as a dark person growing up. I felt like a dark person. I felt like others saw me as a dark person. In the darkness, the only solution I had for the darkness, I felt like was alcohol. That was the only thing that ever brought a light back on for me. Like in my soul, it was the only thing that filled whatever that was, like emptiness, sadness, darkness, regret, you know, like missing my sister, like being upset for my family's suffering. You know, I struggled a lot with knowing like how awful it was for my parents to lose a child. So like that was an equally sad thing for me growing up.
So you experienced your loss of your sister, but then you also, in addition to your own grief, were witnessing your parents' grief. And that was a burden for you, especially for someone like you that feels so deeply and thinks so deeply.
Yeah. I had one older sister pass away, and then I had my other older sister who was in school with me and who, you know, like knew kind of the situation at home and knew what I was going through, and we were going through it together. And then she developed a chronic illness where she couldn't be at school a lot of the time, and I couldn't hang out with her, and that created a lot of conflict, honestly, because we didn't know what the chronic illness was. I just thought she wasn't going to school because she didn't want to, and I was mad that she wasn't going to school. And then I was taking her clothes because she wouldn't know because she wasn't at school, and so it just created a lot of conflict. But yeah, like I said, alcohol did fill this hole in me.
So your alcohol use increases through college, but eventually you graduate and then you transition into post-graduation life. What is that like for you?
So yeah, I graduated UMass in May of 2021. At this point, my alcoholism was kind of full-fledged alcoholism. I was completely in secret. I was drinking like pretty much every day at this point.
Wow.
And I also had told some people in my life that I was struggling with alcohol. So, you know, it was kind of out there in a way, but I did manage to graduate. I moved home to Hingham, and I went back to my high school summer job to do it for one last summer. And that summer was probably like the darkest. I wouldn't say it was the darkest, but it was the start of a very dark time for me. So I was home. I knew that I had just graduated college. It was time for me to get a job and a career and you know, like launch my adulthood. And I was drinking alone in secret, and I knew that was gonna cause, like, I couldn't get past that. So
you knew that was going to interfere with you entering this phase of adulthood.
Yeah, it already was interfering with it. You know, like I decided I would stop hanging out with my friends because I would rather drink alone, or I wouldn't go home at night after work because I'd rather just drink alone. And you know, it was a lot. That's when it just got like lonelier and lonelier and darker. And it was weird because I was in my hometown in the summer, and it was the place that I had had so many good memories. And here I was like 20, how old was I? 22 years old, like in alcoholism, not knowing who to turn to. I don't think I knew any sober people at the time. I didn't know what it meant to even be sober. Like I didn't know what to do at all. So I decided, like, I'm going to solve this myself, and I'm going to move to California. And if I move to California, like, that'll be the solution.
And why California? You just wanted to get as far away from home as possible?
Yeah.
Like a total fresh start?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, I have a brother who lives in California, so that was a little bit of a comfort factor. But I wanted to be as far away from Hingham as possible. You know, I, at this point, decided I hated Hingham and I wanted nothing to do with it, and I never wanted to come back here, and I wanted to move on and go live this life in California, and I thought that was the solution. And I told myself, so I did van life at the time. So I bought a van, and I, like, worked on it with my dad that summer and was going to drive it out to California and move there, and that is ultimately what I did. Unfortunately, I wasn't being open at all with anyone about the fact that I was trying to stop drinking.
So your parents didn't know that you were looking to escape some kind of cyclical difficulty that you were having?
Yeah. I mean, my parents definitely knew that something was going on, I think, because with drinking came a lot of conflict. Even when I wasn't necessarily drunk, I was very unhappy, like, and I was having a lot of conflict with my parents and with my siblings and with my friends, and I wasn't doing well. I wasn't happy to graduate college. I wasn't happy to be an adult. I struggled with the transition from childhood to young adulthood and then adulthood. I struggle with the transitions of life.
Right.
And I really was not having a good summer. The solution, I thought, and my parents were kind of on board with it and supportive, was if I moved to California, I can, like, start a new life and get a job and be independent, and, like I said, launch my adulthood.
But that didn't go according to plan.
No, it did not go according to plan. I mean, I ended up in California. I did arrive there, but I told myself, like, I wasn't gonna drink on my journey to California. That was, like, my promise to myself. I promised, like, you know, I can't do this anymore. Like, I've been trying to stop drinking. It's not working. And so I'm going to start new, and I'm going to be sober this whole ride to California, and I'm going to live a sober life in California. And I didn't realize at the time that that's just, like, not how alcoholism works. So I was drinking by the time I got to New York City, and I drank the whole rest of the way. And it was a hard journey because I think at home people thought I was launching into adulthood, and I was living this cool van life, and I was posting on Instagram that it was going awesome, and I was, you know, in this national park and that national park. And
so you still had that facade going on.
Yeah.
And then behind the facade was a very real struggle for you.
Yeah, I was pretending that things were okay. I think my family was you know, aware that it wasn't as good as I was saying it was. But again, I was sending pictures to my mom, like selfies to my mom, like, look, I'm in, you know, like Arches National Park. And a really difficult moment for me was my mom came to finish a part of that ride for me, of that drive. And she met me in Montana, and she was supposed to come with me to Los Angeles, to drive to Montana to Los Angeles. But at that point, I was so deep in my alcoholism that the idea of my mom being with me from Montana to Los Angeles was like, I could not do it, because that would mean
you couldn't drink the way you wanted to drink.
Yeah. Like, I couldn't be in a hotel room with my mom. I couldn't be in the car with my mom. I was just like, this isn't going to work, because not drinking is not an option for me. At this point, like, not drinking wasn't an option for me. I just had to drink.
Right.
And so I told my mom that she had to go meet me in California. So the plan was for her to, like, finish the journey with me, and it ended up just not happening. And other circumstances happened too, and I think, you know, she wasn't too upset about it, but I was in a situation where I was like, I don't know what to do here, because I can't not drink and my mom's here. So I need to get her out so I can drink.
Right. So there's a lot of strategizing.
Yeah.
I mean, your days, you were basically consumed with, how can I drink? How can I do it without other people knowing? And how can I find ways to like do it in private and not have anyone recognize the signs of me having been drinking?
Yeah. Yeah, but at the same time, I was also reading self-help books about how to stop drinking, and I was listening to podcasts about how to stop drinking.
So you were doing some work, like the effort that you intended to make, it didn't go according to plan per se because you were still drinking, but you were putting in some of that work.
Yeah, I started to try to figure out how I could fix this problem. I knew it was a problem at this point, like a full-on problem, because I didn't want to be drinking. And I just was drinking. You know, like I was drinking against my will, like every day.
So while you're in California, you settle into van life and you just can't stop drinking. Every day is all about alcohol.
Yeah. Again, I was now alone in a studio apartment in Santa Monica, and living like the dream life to some people and to myself, like that. It was the dream life. I had my own apartment in Santa Monica and a very good job, and I couldn't stop drinking still.
So alcohol was going to sabotage your life.
Yeah. Yes.
Whether it was good or bad or indifferent, alcohol was going to continue to be a thorn in your side.
Yeah. So I was in California. I'd been there for about 5 months. And again, I was drinking every day and trying to stop and not succeeding. I could go like 3 days was my number. Like I could make it 3 days. And on the third day, I'm like, I love being sober and sobriety's the best. And then the night of the third day, I would usually drink again. And so I was like trying to be sober, but I got to a point where I was drinking so much that I started, like I couldn't keep track of conversations I was having. I would forget, like if I had a conversation or not. People would say to me, like, remember we were talking about that? Or they would ask me questions, or I would meet someone and not remember meeting them, like, because I was constantly under the influence for at this point, like a few years at this point.
So you would start drinking the moment you woke up in the morning, basically?
Yeah. I was drinking like around the clock. Like night and day kind of stopped mattering to me. At this point, I also had slept through my alarm so many times that I lost my job. So alcohol, I lost my job. I didn't have any income, so I couldn't pay my rent. So my parents were paying my rent. And it started going downhill very quickly once I got to California. Like if I would go days without drinking, I was sweating. Like I just started getting physical effects of not drinking or drinking.
Did you ever consider rehab while you were in California?
Yeah, I think I considered it. You know, I knew that maybe that would be good for me to do, because slowly I started to realize, like, you know, reading these self-help books and promising myself I'm not going to drink today, it's not working. Like I keep doing it. So I didn't really know what rehab was, but I thought that maybe that would someday be something I would do. So yeah, in California, there was a day when I was kind of at this point where it was like, I cannot go on living like this. Like I cannot do it anymore. It's too painful. Like I don't know why I can't stop drinking. Like I tell myself I don't want to, and then I do over and over and over. So it felt like at that point, the only solution was to like end my life. And I knew that wasn't the solution.
You were considering ending your life because alcohol had such a stranglehold on you?
Yes. Yeah. So alcohol brought me to a place where it had such a strong pull on me that
you didn't see any other way out.
Yeah. Like you would think just stop drinking, but at that point I had been trying to stop drinking for 3 years.
And long-term use impacts your mental health. So, you know, you're already compromised.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I've been diagnosed with depression like since I was very young. So I already had some mental health issues or struggles. It kind of runs in my family, but I was at the point in California where I knew that whatever I was doing was not working. And I was so desperate at that point that I would do anything to get out of the situation I was in. You know, like I knew that if I didn't reach out for help, like I didn't know what would happen, but I knew that I could not go on the way that I was living.
When you reach that crossroads of, I need help, I think that the only way out is to take my own life, where did you go from there? Because you were clearly at rock bottom.
Yeah, so I, at this point, had kind of pushed my family away and my friends. My parents have always been in my life and very loving and supportive of me. And so they were the only people that I had at that point, really. So I called my mom and both my parents together, and I told them the situation. And, you know, I said, like, not only is it very bad right now, it's been very bad for a few years, and I don't know what to do, but I need to do something. And that's when I first went to treatment. And so they flew me home and they told me, in 2 weeks you're going to have a flight home. And I was like, there's no way that I can make it 2 weeks. Like,
wow.
That was like the worst thing I could hear at the time, because I couldn't make it like a day. Every day was like, I remember looking in the mirror, like I just could not stand who I had become and what my life was. And I also like taped newspapers all over my mirrors because I couldn't like look at myself anymore. And
wow.
Yeah, I told them like 2 weeks is way, 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 way too long. And I think I left California like 2 days after that. And then I went to treatment for the first time.
And what was that like? How long were you there?
So I came home from California and I went to a place called Hannah Wellness, which is in Seekonk. And I was there for about 5 months. Heron was the first time that I really learned that my alcoholism was about a lot more than alcohol. You know, it wasn't actually really about alcohol at all. It was about me and like my thinking and my behaviors and the way I viewed the world. And Heron was the first time that I was really challenged, like on my own thoughts and what I thought was true about myself and those around me and the world. And that was like the first step in.
It was a breakthrough for you.
Yeah.
And then after leaving heroin, did you go back to using?
Yeah, so I learned a lot. My first time in treatment, I learned a lot with my family. We did family sessions. I basically realized at that point that what I thought about the world wasn't always true. And like my assumptions were not always true. And that was a big change for me. I still hadn't really faced the fact that I could never drink again. So I was kind of still not sure if I wanted to give up alcohol for the rest of my life. That was just very daunting to me. Although I had a lot of experience showing that it wasn't doing anything good for me, I still was super uncomfortable with the idea of never drinking again.
Right.
And I wasn't sure that I was an alcoholic. Ironically, I was still kind of like, yes, I have a problem and I drink too much, but I wasn't totally sold on what alcoholism was or what it meant, and wasn't totally sure that I was one of those people,
Right. So after heroin, were there lots of stops and starts in your recovery journey?
After Heron Wellness, I went to a few other places. I was kind of back in a place where I was trying to do it on my own again, and I'm not going to drink today, and then I would drink, and then it was back to square one in a lot of ways with my alcoholism. Because I can stay away from alcohol and I can go back to it, and it's the same. I have the same reaction that I had when I stopped drinking.
So you recognized after a couple of starts and stops that you would never be able to have a healthy relationship with alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, I think it took me a few more. I wouldn't say I realized that right when I left heroin, but I went to a few other places, and over time, I did start to realize, like, okay, this is my 6th treatment center in a year. I've told myself I'm going to stay sober every single time, and every single time I end up back at square one. I just keep drinking. So I went down to South Florida for what's hopefully my last treatment. And that was the first time that I was around other people who were much further along than me. It was the first time I was around anyone with cirrhosis of the liver. I was around a lot of moms who had either lost their kids or were very close to it. I just saw kind of what may happen to me if I don't take a turn in my life and do something differently. And while I realized that, I also realized that at this point, I'm powerless over alcohol, and that's a recovery phrase, but what it means and what it meant to me at that moment was because I am powerless over alcohol, I am going to drink again, because I don't get to choose when I drink and when I don't, because clearly I've told myself I'm not going to drink again, and then I do.
Right.
At that point, I kind of realized, okay, I have this problem. I am an alcoholic. I understand and accept that at this point. And what does that mean? It means that I'm going to do this again and again and again until I don't, and I find another way to live my life, and I find some solution. So I ended up going to a treatment center that was pretty 12-step based, and that's ultimately what worked for me. There's a lot of ways that people recover, but I am someone who could not get sober until I did those things, until I took the 12 steps, and that has been what has kept me sober this long.
And how long have you been sober?
So my sobriety date is December 24th, Christmas Eve of 2022. So I have almost 2.5 years.
That's incredible. That's really incredible and very commendable.
Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. So you've been working in the field of recovery for a number of years. You started off sort of entry-level positions, and now you've done something recently really exciting. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so in March, I opened Rosewood Sober Living, a sober house for women, and we are located in Braintree. I'm someone that went through sober living myself, and it really helped me. It was kind of the first place that I was surrounded by other women who were in the same situation as me, who were working towards the same goal as me. And it was the first time I kind of had a community. I had felt alone for so long, and being in a women's house with, again, other women who were working towards the same goal as me really helped just build hope in me that I could, live this life in recovery and move forward, and I didn't have to always repeat the cycle of in, out, and so
you're looking to instill that in other people.
Yeah, I realized early on that it was something that I wanted to do one day. Early on in my time in the women's houses, I knew that it was something that I wanted to do one day, and because I feel so many women's and men, but the women who have helped me in my sobriety have inspired me so much that I just wanted to hopefully do the same for someone else. And yeah, I realized early on that this was something that I wanted to do, and through conversations I've had with others, I believe that if you have a desire to do something and you feel called to do something, then as long as you are doing, have support and are doing the next right thing and have pure motives in it, you should follow your dreams. And so that's what I have done. And so our house has been open for 2 months.
Wow.
Yeah, we're a pretty small house, but it's a structured house. So girls are working on their recovery. They're going to meetings. They're, participating in the local recovery community. I don't know if people know, but Quincy, Mass is a pretty big recovery mecca, people say. There's a lot of meetings, a lot of really strong recovery there. So our house is very close to Quincy. So yeah, I wanted to open the house in a place that there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of work opportunities, and there's a lot of support for young women who are just trying to, restart and relearn how to live.
And do what you've done.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to find out about Rosewood House, how would they go about doing that? Do you have a website?
I do, yes. So the website is rosewoodsoberliving.com. My phone number is there. There's also our email, a contact form.
And you're in Braintree?
Yes, we are in Braintree.
So the last two questions that I have for you are questions that I ask every guest because I think it's always interesting, regardless of what your experiences are, what your key takeaways are. So one question is, do you have any advice for parents on how to keep their children safe around substances?
The most important thing you can do as a parent in terms of prevention is just being kind to your child, being a kind parent, present, being involved emotionally with your kid, asking them how they're doing and like if they're going through changes, asking them how those changes are feeling for them. And basically, like, I think supporting your child and making sure they know that they're loved and cared for and noticed and important is the best thing you can do for prevention.
So it's all about mental health and wellness and...
Yeah, just thinking about my parents and what my experience was. And I think, especially nowadays, like, they need to be built up and supported, like even being told like you're brave, you're strong, you're kind, you're beautiful. They're constantly comparing themselves to each other online and in person too. And I think as a parent, don't assume that they're getting told that they're beautiful and brave and smart and kind and can do anything they want anywhere else other than home.
That's
like
a great
sometimes
point.
you're the only person that's going to tell them that. So I think, as a parent, just be your child's biggest cheerleader.
Great advice just across the board. Do you have any advice for young people on how to make healthy choices around substances? I'm sure you've reflected on that quite a bit over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think to a young person, I would say don't believe the lie that you need to drink and do drugs to fit in or to have fun or to be cool or be normal. You definitely don't. And high school is a time when you can try a lot of things. You can try theater, you can try crew, you can try tennis, you can go to summer camp and try all these summer jobs, and don't let drugs and alcohol become more important than anything else. If you're a young person and you think you may struggle with drugs and alcohol, my biggest piece of advice is if you know someone who is in recovery themselves, reach out to them. I think other alcoholics are the best at helping alcoholics, and especially if you know someone young. I mean, I know that there's a few of us that have graduated Hingham High School that, work together and help others. And if you know anyone, like, that's my advice, is to reach out to someone. I know that when I was struggling, I didn't necessarily know who had been through the same thing as me and who was further along in their journey. But if you know anyone that has, that's a good first step.
So it's not so isolating.
Yeah, so it's not so isolating, and know that you're not the only one. And if you think you may have a problem, like, it's best to just, why not talk about it?
Well, Hannah, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today and for your vulnerability, for your incredible insight. I want to congratulate you again on your recovery journey and wishing you all the best as you move forward, and wishing you all the best with this new home that you've started for young women in Braintree. I think that's really incredible, very commendable.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. You've been listening to Substance Free 02043. We hope that you will tune in again. For more info or to get involved, go to hinghamcares.org.